Hey
Hey
guys,
guys,
so in this
Orlia here,
video, I
and welcome
wanted to
to another
share
video.
just 5
So,
possible
in today's
factors that
video,
can
I
come into
wanted to
play
share
for
7
people
things
whose
that can
detox
be really
systems
helpful
are
when you're dealing with
more
a mold and
impaired
a
than
toxin situation in your living
the average
space,
healthy person.
and
Things
things
that
that can
might
help
play a role
as far
for
as keeping the air
people who do
clearer
have a
and
tough
things
time,
like that.
um,
So,
whose physical
the
bodies
first
have a
one
tough
and the
time
most
removing
important thing
toxins
I
and
would say
things
is
out of their
either
systems.
if you're able to move or remediate the mold in your living situation,
So none of
that
this
would be the
video
number one
is to
thing.
be taken
The
as
other six
any sort of
points I'm going
medical
to mention
advice
can help,
or even
but they
nursing
don't
advice. This
necessarily
video is
replace
just for
the
information
need to
purposes
either
only, as with
live in a
all of
space
my
that
other
is
videos.
toxin free
So if
and
you have
has
any
a
questions,
low
I
amount
strongly
of
recommend that you
molds,
consult with a qualified healthcare provider.
or
That way you can get the
remediating
medical
like
advice that you
professional
need for
mold
your unique
remediation
situation.
in the
This
space
is
you're
just for
already living in.
information purposes only.
I've seen with myself trying to stay in
And so
places
the
longer than I needed
first
to,
one
and
I
I've
want to
seen this
mention
with many
is
other
mold and
patients
mycotoxins, and this is
who
still a
deal with these
mold
mold
and
issues,
toxin
and if they
series.
don't get
But
into
mold
a
in and of
space that has a
itself,
lower
one of the
load,
things
whether
that it
through
does to
mold
help stay
remediation
alive in the
or
body
through
is that
moving
it
to
does impair the
a less
detox
toxic space,
pathways
they
that
just
your body
don't get
uses
better.
to get
Like
rid
for
of
me
toxins
personally, I
and
would get better
things
for a
out of the
while, and
body.
then I kind of hit a wall and I just
So
start kind of
mold and the
crashing
toxins
again.
both can do
So,
this.
number
And
one
there
thing
is a
would be
subset of the
if you're able to
population, I believe in
um,
Neil
live in a
Nathan's
space that
book,
does not have
he said about
um,
they estimate about
toxins
25%
or
of the
like
population.
the high levels of
But there is
mold
a subset of the
or
population that
remediation
when
would be
they're
the number
exposed
one
to
thing.
mold and toxins
In the
in general,
meantime,
their bodies just do not
the other thing
detox
that
as
can help
efficiently
is
as it
having
needs
plants,
to.
like
So while
up in
someone
your
else might
space.
be able to
Plants have the
uh,
ability to
detox these
naturally,
toxins, and
purify and
just as
clean
an
the air.
example,
Like
just for illustrative purposes,
they
say
were
they could
and are
detox
the
this stuff out of their system within a
original
few days.
air
It might
purifiers,
take
so
much
to
longer
speak.
for
And
someone
they have a
who's
lot of other
dealing with
benefits too, just
these
being in your
things
space
with
and
an
their
impaired
energy and their
detox
vibe. So,
system. And
I've
there are
noticed
other
since I've
reasons as
been
to why
living
that
with
might
my
be that
mom,
I'll
because
get
that's where
into
I moved
later in
to
the
from my
video.
apartment,
But
that I kept gravitating
just know there
towards
are
her
people,
office,
and
which
I've
is
been through it
full of
myself, where
plants. And
like
in
I've been
my old
exposed to
apartment, I didn't really
toxins.
have plants
I
because I was
do
afraid
the
of bringing in a
detox
plant that would be
protocols because I
toxic for
worked
my
with a healthcare
cats.
provider to help detox my
But there
system
are
out.
lists online
And
if you have
it's
pets. You
months
can
later, and
Google like
I'm still
plants
dealing
that
with
are
the effects of these
non-toxic for
things.
cats or whatever pet you have,
And there are
and then
multiple
just make sure
reasons
you
as to
get those
why,
plants.
but
So that's what I
like
started doing.
the point I'm making is
So I
that
got a
people
couple
can be
plants for
exposed to these
myself,
and they
and
can
then I
be
got me
out
one
for the
for my
count for
cats,
quite
and
some time, especially if
they
they've been
enjoy being
exposed to
around
these
plants
things
too. Like
in their
their
system for
vibe
a
is
long
different too.
time. The
So
body has to go and actually
plants
heal
can be
itself
a
from it.
wonderful
It's not
natural
enough
way
to
to
just remove the
help
toxins out
purify
of the
the air in your
system.
space.
The body also needs
The
enough of a
next
break from
one
that
I kind of
chronic
alluded to
inflammation
already,
to
but is
be
an air
able to
purifier.
repair and heal
Air
itself,
purifiers are the machines
which
that
they're
can draw out
sometimes it's
the
easier said
air,
than
like
done,
the
and sometimes
toxins
the
and
body
stuff,
needs
and
some
they'll
extra
trap
support
it
with
in
being
a
able to
filter.
do that. And for some people, it has to be a slower, steadier process kind of thing, as opposed to trying to do everything and as much as possible, as quick as possible. So the second thing is active genes, and the reason why I put it that way is that, I kind of look at our genomics and our genes as kind of like a motherboard, like a switchboard on a computer, or you could also look at it kind of like a landscape. There are many genes, and some of them can turn on and off like a light switch. So you can have genes that might be active at some point and then no longer be active later, or vice versa. And I mentioned functional genomics because this is a little bit different from like your ancestry type uh, DNA tests. Functional genomics are DNA tests that are clinically done to look for like how things are clinically relevant on a much deeper level than if you were to just do an ancestry type of DNA test, even though there's health information there. So I'll give you an example. I did one of these tests myself through a company called Integrative DNA. I'm not being sponsored. It's just the one that me and my provider decided to use, and it came back with more than 60 pages of various different genes that they found that are associated with various different conditions. And with this one, it's not like, okay, you have this gene, so you have this condition or you're going to get it. It's more, hey, you have a lot of genes here that make it the environment more likely to support XYZ. They'll show helpful and non-helpful genes. So it's not like it's just a completely depressing, these are all the things that are, that can go wrong. It also shows it shows protective type genes too that you have on things, whether it's protective against certain things with high blood pressure or diabetes or histamine, food sensitivities, with detoxification, which is why I bring it up here. You know, um, there are actually genes that can make it harder for the body to naturally detox without very targeted support. And what I like about these tests is that they not only show the genes and, hey, this is what it can be linked to or what it can be protective for, it also will give actionable steps on what you can do to help work around those genes and to help like mitigate the effects of those genes. Um, so whether it's a supplement, a certain diet, whether it's certain medication, like it's very integrative where it doesn't prioritize one specific modality of things over another. It's very inclusive in that way. And so I'll give you an example, like there's genes that can actually make it hard for your gut to absorb vitamin B12. And vitamin B12 does play a role in the methylation cycle. It does play a role in a lot of different things, especially with the nervous system. Um, and so knowing that, okay, you might need, like it might say you might need a different form, a very specific form of vitamin B12 that'll absorb better in your system. Just as an example, you know, and that actually was taken from my own report. So that's where I got that information from. But going back to the detox thing, um, some people just have active genes and active genomics that make it so that the body requires extra support with detoxification of anything. And if you mix that with something like mold or some other toxins or heavy metals, your body really might need some support to really help effectively clear those out of your system. And I do mean, when I say clear it out the system, I mean more than just drinking a lot of water. I've tried that. It didn't work for me. It helped, but it wasn't enough by itself. So this brings me to my next one, which is the heavy load of infection and toxins. So if you're dealing with toxins and mold and chronic infections, whether they're like a simple cold, whether you're dealing with something like a virus, a post-viral infection syndrome like long COVID, a stealth pathogen infection like Lyme, Babesia, Bartonella, all of that stuff creates a really heavy load because the body doesn't differentiate, like, oh, okay, this is mold, this is toxins, this is COVID, this is Lyme or Bartonella. For the body, it has to deal with all of those things. It doesn't matter what the name is, the body has to deal with and detox all those things. And when the load, like literally the weight, like the amount of toxins and infection is high in the body, it can suppress the immune system. And some of these pathogens actually have evolved to specifically do things to suppress the immune system. So when the immune system is super duper suppressed, it can't fight back. So then the load just continues to get heavier and heavier. And it's kind of hard to detox your system without the help of your immune system. That plays a major role. And so even if you don't have like liver disease or you don't have kidney disease, you don't have any of those things, you can still have um, your system be overloaded with all of this stuff, and it just makes it harder for the body to effectively detox and get rid of all of the toxins and fight these things off. So just the sheer load of all of the things combined sometimes can be a lot, even if you weren't exposed to a lot of mold, or you weren't exposed to certain things for a long time. If you chronically have a lot in your system, it does still add up, which actually brings us to the next point, which is chronic inflammation. All of these things, whether it's toxins in your system, heavy metals in your system, um, mold, those infections, all of these things create chronic inflammation. And just about every chronic condition out there, whether it's high blood pressure, whether it's diabetes, whether it's an autoimmune condition, all of those things essentially is some form of chronic inflammation. And I kind of look at chronic inflammation similar to like an environment. So if you're trying to grow a rainforest, but you have desert like conditions, it's not going to work. It's going to grow and help those that thrive well in a desert situation. So like instead of getting palm trees and like the rainforest type stuff, you might get a cactus. You might get cactuses and animals who thrive very well in those conditions instead of like the rainforest, if that's what you're looking for. Well, it's the same thing with chronic inflammation. Chronic inflammation is a really good environment for infections to thrive, for more infections to thrive. These toxins thrive well in inflammation, you know, but our organs and our tissues don't thrive very well in chronic inflammation, hence why we usually experience a lot of problems if we've had chronic inflammation in some way. Um, and you can have chronic inflammation and not feel it yet because the body does know how to overcompensate, um, which is usually how most conditions start. The body overcompensates using something that's supposed to be a short term fix, but then the issue doesn't go away, so it keeps using a short term fix for a long term solution, and then eventually the body gets to the point where it just can't keep up anymore. And then some people do end up experiencing um, where all of a sudden, or just very quickly, they start feeling really, really sick really, really fast and feeling symptoms when they didn't before. So, not that that's any fault of the body, it's trying to do what it can to function. Um, but just to say, chronic inflammation can be a major role as far as your body's ability to detoxify. Because when you have chronic inflammation, even if all the toxins are removed, your body is using extra nutrients just to be able to not only deal with the inflammation, but to also keep organs working in spite of the inflammation. It just requires way more resources than if that inflammation wasn't there. And the last one I'm going to mention, just because infection can play a role, like if you have a high load of various infections, um, is biofilms. So, if you're not familiar with what those are, they're essentially a shield that protects bacteria, a shield that protects um, bacteria, mold spores, things like that. It forms a community, a protective community, pretty much within your body. One example that I have a picture of is like plaque for atherosclerosis. That is a type of biofilm. I believe that is a fibrin type of biofilm. Or like the plaque on your teeth. That is another example. There are various different types of biofilms, so in order to break some of them down, they said some of them require different substances to do so because they're made out of different materials. But when you have infection or mold, and I'm not sure if toxins can get stuck in there, but they're much smaller than mold spores, so it wouldn't surprise me if that were the case. But when they get stuck in there, your antibiotics are not going to penetrate those defenses like much at all. And if that infection is still in your system, and eventually those biofilms, they're kind of like nests, they can break apart at some point and then release those viruses, those infections, those mold spores back into your system months later, even years later. You get stressed in the body, and it can, you know, these things can have a field day, and then all of a sudden you feel sick when you thought you've already dealt with this stuff before. But if your system is constantly picking up, okay, there's a threat somewhere, but it can't see it because the immune system can't pick up on stuff but so much when it's in these biofilm things. And they can't do much about it when they're in those biofilm things. You know, that can make it hard for your body to detox too because the threat's not completely gone. It's still there, hiding around. Hence, why I use the word stealth pathogens, because some of these pathogens, they have a lot of different ways on sticking around in some sort of way, um, and it can, without addressing what's in those biofilms, because there are healthy biofilms too, just like there's healthy bacteria, like healthy probiotics kind of thing. When those biofilms are filled with like all these pathogenic type things, it can make it and slow down the process for your body to detox as well. In which case, highly recommend working with a healthcare provider to break those down, because it can be a process. So, as I've said in my other slides, highly recommend when you're dealing with this sort of thing, whether it's detoxification, whether it's just the mold and the toxins by itself, whether it's an infection, I highly recommend working with a qualified healthcare provider on these issues as opposed to trying to figure this stuff out on your own. Just because certain things, if you've been exposed to certain things that you're not aware of and you start to clear some of these out, you can experience what's called a Herxheimer reaction. Bartonella is one of those ones that I've personally dealt with. And some people, if they just had a heavy load for a long time, it doesn't even have to be a specific pathogen or a specific bacteria, but it can still cause a Herxheimer reaction, which is also called die off, where you start to feel worse before you get better. And if you start to feel worse and you don't know if that's what you're experiencing, you can make yourself sick really, really fast if this is not done in a very targeted manner. And I have heard people end up needing to go to the hospital trying to handle all of this stuff by themselves, kind of thing. So I highly recommend finding like someone in functional medicine. That's where I find a lot of this information myself, is in like the realm of functional medicine. But any provider who is familiar with these things and is willing to help people work on those things, I think would be a really um, helpful way to try and go about beginning to address these detox type of things. So, with all that said, thank you for taking the time to listen to this video. If you have any questions, comments, feel free to put them in the comments section. I'd love to hear you guys' feedback and like your own experiences with this, if you've had any, what your thoughts were. And I will see you guys in another video.